So hi everyone, and thanks for joining us. For folks who don't know me, my name is Gilbert Michaud. I am a faculty member here at the Voinovich School, and thanks for joining for this week's Lunch and Learn. Excited to be here and moderating or facilitating, I suppose, this session. Before we sort of get started, I wanted to go over just a couple quick housekeeping things, and some of this is probably really straightforward for folks who've been using Zoom for quite a while now in this virtual environment. But as we just went through it, I really encourage folks to, hang on, I'm letting some folks in, to mute themselves, especially while our presenter is speaking, to give him respect and to avoid any disruptions. I'd encourage folks to use your chat function instead to communicate with me or amongst yourselves. And once we get to the formal Q&A portion of the program, we'll make sure that we get to all those questions, and we'll have 15 or 20 minutes at the end or so to address those via chat. On that note, if you do want to sort of raise your hand and unmute yourself and speak directly to Mike or myself to ask questions, we'd encourage that too. You can do that directly in Zoom here and hopefully unmute yourself, and I can help facilitate that as well as needed. So chat is preferred, unless Mike, once I turn it over to you, if you do want to take questions while you're going through the slides, I'll defer to you on that one. Also, full transparency, we are recording the session just so folks know, or if you need to go back and interested in rewatching some of the session. And before I start to introduce Mike and segue to that portion of the program, I just wanted to quickly ask, and I'm sort of looking at you, I guess maybe Dr. DeBelco or Jen or other folks that are on the line here. If you have any quick announcements you'd like to make to students or upcoming events or anything you'd like to share before we jump in here, now's the time.
Thanks, Gilbert. I have we'll send around details at a science cafe that'll be relevant and of interest on the November 16th, but more details to follow. Thanks for the opportunity.
Great. Anything from you, Jen, or other faculty staff? Okay, great. Thanks, Dr. DeBelco. Look forward to seeing details about that. Let's move to sort of the main portion of the program. Happy to be joined here today by a newer friend, relatively speaking, and colleague, Mike Volpe. Mike is a co-founder at Open Road Renewables. I met Mike probably about a year ago. I think it was last winter. We got connected, realized we had a lot of overlapping interests and networks, not only here in Ohio, but also states like Virginia and the Carolinas. And we just finished up, and Mike will talk more about this during his presentation, a big economic impact study we've done at the school for Mike's company and a broader coalition of other developers that he works with here in Ohio. They've been doing a lot of projects in the state, and excited to hear more about that. Mike, I'll let you introduce yourself in terms of where you're from and where you went to school, more about Open Road Renewables and all that good stuff. But it looks like we got your slides up. I'll turn it over to you and mute myself, and floor is yours for about 30 minutes or so. So
Great.
Without further ado, yeah, Mike Volpe, thanks for
All right, good afternoon, Friday afternoon, folks. Mike Volpe with Open Road Renewables. We have been developing projects in the region for about the last 5 years, and the presentation today will talk about why there is active solar project development in the Buckeye State, what's driving that, what development looks like, and how students can get involved. As a bit of background on my end, I have a multidisciplinary skill set. I'm a mechanical engineer by trade, did an economics minor in undergrad, and then went on and did a full-time MBA, where the technical background along with some of the structured finance skill set has become helpful. So too, we've gotten involved in the policy arena. As you're creating a new industry, it seems like banding together with other practitioners to work through the growing pains is a way that we've gotten organized. Our business is a greenfield development company, which means that we're very tip of the spear in taking open farmland with high voltage transmission lines that run through it, through a 4 to 5 year development cycle prior to construction start and operations. We are focused on larger projects in the 100, 200 megawatt scale. The reason for that is that's how you get to least cost economics. As an industry, we are focused on being at par with conventional generation. So to get there, you need the unit economics to be as optimized as possible. And what we find is that 100 to 200 megawatt range appears to be the minimum efficient scale to get to the least cost. The first large project under construction is the Hillcrest Solar Project in Brown County. Our company developed that. It's currently being built by PCL and Intergex, an independent power producer, as the long-term owner. Going back to the 100 to 200 megawatt project size, that generally, a good rule of thumb is between 5 and 7 acres per megawatt. So the Hillcrest project that is 200 megawatts, that sits on about 1,200 acres in Brown County off of Highway 32, probably about hour and a half west of campus. It's under construction now. If you have interest in knowing the location, I'm happy to share it with you. You can drive by and see it. But we are greenfield developers, so we figure out all elements of the development process up to construction start. We're going to talk about what that means today. Before we go on to talk about what's driving Ohio's solar boom, any questions about our company background? Or if not, I'll just keep on rolling. Okay, the way that I think about this, there's a supply side of the equation and a demand side of the equation. On the supply side of the equation, over the last 10 years, the levelized cost of electricity of solar has declined by 80%. What has driven that? Two key things. Technological innovation. We've gotten better at manufacturing solar panels. And there were previous constraints in the supply chain that through the competitive forces, global supply chain has scaled. So I will show a picture and then we'll come back to this slide. This source is from Lazard. National Renewable Energy Lab has a similar chart, but this shows 2010 levelized cost of electricity versus today. And this is the unsubsidized levelized cost of electricity. So what we're saying right now, the unsubsidized cost of solar is between $30 and $40 a megawatt hour, or on a per kilowatt hour basis, that's between 3 and 4 cents a kilowatt hour. That's the supply side. On the demand side, what is causing more projects to be under development in Ohio? It's two key drivers. One, Fortune 500s like Amazon and Google and Microsoft and Facebook, Procter and Gamble, et cetera, have sustainability goals where, based upon their shareholder interest and their customer preferences, they have made commitments as sort of independent businesses that say, to maximize my place in the marketplace, I am going to transition to renewable energy. I am going to reduce the carbon intensity of my business operations. That is a very meaningful element of Ohio's solar boom. Right now, there's a lot of data center expansion in the New Albany area. A lot of those data center companies have made commitments to clean energy, and that is on the demand side. Additionally, Ohio and probably 8 or 9 other states in the PJM region have renewable portfolio standards or alternative energy portfolio standards that says by a certain calendar year, a certain percentage of the energy mix for that state has to come from eligible renewable resources. We'll talk through those demand drivers. So why Ohio? We're very fortunate in Ohio to have more than 10 million acres of tillable land. There's an extremely robust transmission system that we're going to talk about. The underlying wholesale marketplace with PJM, there's a great opportunity for economic development. And we're very fortunate that the state at the Ohio Power Siting Board has a constructive siting regime. That's sort of the contours of the discussion today. And then we'll sort of cap it off with, if this is interesting, if it seems like a great career opportunity, how can students get involved? Any questions before we move on? Okay, We looked at the install cost of solar. The analogy that I use when I'm working with farmers in particular is solar panels are like flat screen TVs. And 10 years ago, only your real rich friend had a flat screen TV, and a flat screen TV was $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, and you'd be a fool to go get a flat screen TV. But now you go down to Walmart and you can get a flat screen TV for $250. It is the same innovation on flat screen TVs that is enabling the cost of solar to decline. And it's the engineers in labs across universities in the country that are driving innovation on material science side, manufacturing processes, et cetera. It is a technology play. Solar has come down in cost due to technological innovation. It's really, really a neat phenomenon. And I think, we're not going to get too much into the environmental side, but I think the environment is fortunate for the declining cost in solar. This shows a comparison. This is a 2020 Lazard comparison of the levelized cost of energy of competing technologies. And what you see here in the conventional bottom section, combined cycle gas has the lowest LCOE right now of conventional technologies that are being added. And then within the renewable sector, we are seeing that unsubsidized solar is in the $30 to $40 a megawatt hour range. So there's a transition that's taking place throughout the country where old, uncompetitive coal plants are being economically retired, and they're being replaced with combined cycle natural gas and with solar in part. Onto the demand side, there's an organization called the Renewable Energy Buyers Alliance. All of the Fortune 500s with sustainability goals, or many of them, have banded together to form a coalition to share best practices and learn. This shows the volume of deals that have taken place over the last 4 or 5 years. If you're to sum this up, this comes to probably about 25,000 megawatts of renewable demand. On a comparative basis, this is across North America. On a comparative basis, the Ohio grid probably has about 30,000 megawatt hours of peak load or of generation. So over the last 4 years across the country, there has been about an equivalent amount of renewable energy that has come online because of Fortune 500s as the whole entire Ohio mix. We expect this trend to continue for the next decade or so. And we are in active conversations with these customers because these customers are building new industrial facilities, data centers, retail locations across Ohio. And for that, they want new in-state renewable energy to supply that. And solar is a real great solution for that. I'm going to talk very briefly about the Renewable Portfolio Standard or Alternative Energy Portfolio Standard. This is also a driver of demand. States pass laws that mandate a certain percent of energy by a certain calendar year must come from renewable resources. Pre-House Bill 6, Ohio's requirement was 12.5% by 2026. That got reduced to 8.5%. But across the region, there is demand that is coming from coastal states like New Jersey, Maryland, Virginia, that Ohio projects can actually sell into that marketplace. It is a marketplace across the PJM region. PJM is the underlying wholesale market and the regional transmission organization that Ohio is a part of. And because Ohio is a part of PJM, it has 3 benefits for development. It results in a high fidelity interconnection process. It results in a competitive wholesale market where we can sell the energy to these Fortune 500s. And it also creates the backdrop for the region-wide renewable portfolio standards. That sums up the demand side of the equation. This is a slide on how the RPS process works in practice. I'm probably not going to go too far into detail on this because it's a little bit wonky, but if folks have questions, we can always circle back on this. So the supply side, solar costs have been coming down. Demand side, Fortune 500 demand and renewable portfolio or AE, alternative energy portfolio standard demand. That is what's driving the flurry of development activity across Ohio. We're now going to talk about the development cycle and how a project gets started, what some of the considerations are. This is really our sweet spot as a business. But before I go on, are there any questions from the audience on sort of the foundational drivers of the marketplace? Okay. So on to the 4 to 5 year development cycle. I've got 3 maps up here. The map on the left is the solar resource shown as a gradient across the state. That's a National Renewable Energy Lab chart. The map in the middle shows effectively the topographic relief of the state. And then the third image shows the active solar projects at the Ohio Power Siting Board. What you see on the furthest left image is that the solar resource across Ohio has a slight preference for the southwest corner of the state, Cincinnati, Dayton, on down to Hillsborough, Highway 32 area. And if you look at the middle map, you need flat open land for least cost solar. You can see that as we head towards Athens from Cincinnati, you start to get into Appalachia. As you then head northeast, you continue into Appalachia. The northeastern part of the state is great for natural gas production and for combined cycle natural gas generation. But when you look at solar development and the idea that least cost projects will come on flat tillable land, you're likely to see the majority of the development activity in the areas that don't have a lot of topography, and it's playing out in practice. This snapshot shows the bulk high voltage transmission system of the wires that connect the various power generation facilities, the coal plants, the combined cycle plants, the nuke plants, to the load centers. And if you were to take a very close look, what you can see is that the built infrastructure is connecting rural parts of Ohio to the city centers. And this is by design. For the last 100 years, the way that the system has worked is you would locate a large conventional power generating facility 50, 75 miles away from a city center, likely on a riverbank where you use the water for cooling, and then you string a overhead high voltage transmission line to the city center. This is how it works. The reason is historically conventional generation needed a lot of land. It also generally resulted in air and water emissions. And for that, people don't want a big power plant that has a lot of emissions in their backyard. So they went to more rural areas, and you connect the load centers at the cities to the bulk power generating facilities via the overhead transmission lines. The way that I think about the overhead transmission system is it's effectively an interconnected network of pipes that have water flowing through it. The electrons are the water, and some pipes have room for more water to flow through them than others. They have even more room for water to flow through them when the coal sites shut down, when the existing older generation facilities are retired. That opens up room in the pipes. And if you think about Ohio, between the city centers and the rural power generating facilities, there are transmission lines. And underneath those transmission lines, there are thousands of acres of open farmland, row crops, pasture land, etc. Farming is tough. It's tough to keep family farms going. Farmers are entrepreneurs, and they're always trying to figure out the right mix of crops, how to sell some of their crops forward, insurance, etc. And as we know, it's tough to be a family farm these days. So the very first step in the process that we do in looking for sites to kick off the development process is look at the bulk overhead transmission system and investigate which lines have room for more injection. Going back to the water analogy, which pipes have room for more water to flow through them, because a new large solar facility is like a spigot turning on and pouring in water to that pipe. to then deliver to the city center. Once we identify the overhead transmission circuits or substations that have local capacity, we'll then send letters to these farmers. We get the information of the landowners from the local county governments, all the land records. We say, you know, we haven't had the fortunate meeting, but we are investigating developing a project in your area. Would you have interest in an intro conversation? We believe that we can pay a premium to what you're making on your farmland. And here are some of the common questions that come up and how we can answer those questions. That process kicks off the 4 to 5 year development cycle. And generally, we will partner up with 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe as many as 10 landowner families in a local area that will all decide after a lot of diligence and investigation that they are interested in putting their land into a solar farm. Questions come up on what's going to happen to my soil through the years? What's going to happen at the end of the project life? What's going to happen to the drain tile? And I'm concerned about water runoff to my neighbors. I want to be a good community partner. So what's going to happen in terms of the aesthetics? All of those questions get answered through the exploratory process with them before the landowners decide to move forward or not. Once they decide to move forward, we then enter into a lease agreement, and that process then kicks off a lot of really technical investigation into confirming there's capacity on the lines, investigation into the threatened and endangered species in the area, environmentally sensitive areas like floodplains and wetlands. All of those things are mapped out via experts. We have an ecosystem of biologists, electrical engineers, attorneys. It's a very multidisciplinary skill set, but the whole process culminates on trying to find an arrangement with the local landowners that's compelling for them, doing the technical investigation to determine whether the land is actually suitable for a project, engaging with the local community, folks like the local Chamber of Commerce, county commissioners, school board, farm bureau, all of the neighbors, to work with them to communicate the plans of the project, incorporate their feedback into the process, talk about the opportunity for economic development. And then once we have matured the project to a point where the technical investigation, the land control, the interconnection studies, the engagement with the local community has enabled us to say, yes, this project is a candidate for a real solar project. This 1,000 acre plot is real. We then prepare an application to the Ohio Power Siting Board. I'm going to talk about the siting board process for a quick minute. We'll come back to the economic development opportunity, and I may ask Gilbert to share a few thoughts about it. But in short, and we'll circle back on this, these projects create a lot of opportunity for the participating landowners and for the local county governments. For example, the Hillcrest project, 200 megawatts in Brown County, is going to pay $1.8 million a year in local tax revenue. The majority of that goes to the local school board. And there's also partnerships with Southern States Community College, where a project that requires no resources, no schools for kids, no sewers, none of that, creates a significant windfall tax benefit for the local communities. Local community can then go use that money to improve the services that they provide to the county or lower their taxes. We'll come back to that though. A very, very important part of the process is—
Mike, I have a quick question.
Sure. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Stephanie.
Yeah, just curious, the landowner leases, how long are those? And are they guaranteed flat rate amounts across the period, the life of the contract with the landowner?
Sure, happy to answer that. And there's a lot of content out there. I know OSU Extension has done a lot of work on this. That may be a competing academic institution, but in general, the leases have an upfront 4, 5, 6 year development term where the landowner continues farming the land or hunting on the land And during that point in time, we pay them a modest amount to be able to do all the technical investigation on their land that's not disruptive to their current ag operations. After that, a traditional lease in the operating term commits to a certain payment amount for every single year for a 30, 35, 40-year life of the project. And then it also includes provisions that at the end of the project life, we are obligated to remove all the equipment from the landowner's land. So happy to answer any follow-up questions, but I hope that addressed it.
Mike, I have another quick question. Working with the farmers, as you know, is sometimes a really tough nut to crack. There's often a lot of distrust and from an outsider coming into a community promising big dollar money, these things. What's been your most successful inroad with which local organization? Because it's surely not just a letter to the farmer and all of a sudden they are like, yeah, let's do this. Has there been an example or a model you've used, having the chamber set up a meeting and invite folks they know, or what's been, very successful model there for reaching the farmers to help start building that trust? Like you said, it takes a long time to even get to the, submitting the application.
I would say the farmer's kitchen table or front porch or back porch, it's all one-on-one.
Really? So you sent a letter and they're like, come on over.
Yes.
Wow.
We send a letter and we follow up and we follow up and we follow up and we call.
Okay.
And, maybe more discreetly, as you begin to build trust with the local community, what we find is local farmers are all friends, right? So
right.
The opportunity to build trust with one farmer can then parlay itself to trust with another farmer. But none of this happens if the ability to address the farmer's concerns are not done in a sincere, authentic manner, which is then papered up in the lease agreement. And it takes a multidisciplinary skill set to be able to address the concerns and build that trust. And it's really kicking off a partnership with these farmers for 4 or 5 years that could then lead to 40 years. And there's a lot of economic well-being on the line. So, and maybe, I guess as an aside, we will provide references for other farmers on projects that have gone forward to have folks talk to each other, but it's all one-on-one and there's no way to short circuit that trust building exercise.
So getting that first farmer to engage is key, and then it opens up doors for other opportunities from there.
At times, but I would say there's no substitute for blue jeans and flannel and handwritten letters, which is what makes the job so fun because it's so multidisciplinary, right? I mean, we're talking about hundreds of $1 million of capital expenditure. I think the Hillcrest project is like $289 million capital investment, but it all started from a handwritten note 5 years ago, somebody willing to take a meeting on their back porch, talking through it, structuring the agreement such that all their concerns are addressed. And that's really the gating item that then begins to kick off the 4 or 5 year process.
Okay, thanks.
Sure, good questions. And if you like meeting with people.
I have one other quick landowner.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I have one other quick landowner related question.
Please.
Yeah, so when the projects are done, because obviously the issue for a landowner is then it's the same thing when, the fracking was going on, then their land is encumbered then. So when they sell, if they sell their property, would that transfer to the next, to the purchaser? So say somebody wanted to sell their property, that'd be one question. And then secondly, do you do remediation on the property? Is there an environmental impact study done or any kind of EBS done at the beginning, an environmental baseline survey that's compared to at the end to see if there's any need to remediate from any kind of environmental impacts from the equipment and degradation over time of solar equipment, that kind of thing?
Sure. Happy to answer all those questions. These are good questions. The agreements go with the land, and if a landowner has certain interests, we can work with them that, you know, if they want to sell the land to us, we can look at something like that. And by saying that land is encumbered, there is certainly a commercial arrangement on it, but generally the agreement on the land actually steps up the value, because what's compelling to these landowners is that they can make many multiples what they could make on the farming. In terms of remediation, there's a decommissioning process, but remediation implies that there's some sort of brownfield or environmental contamination with these projects, which there summarily is not. Solar panels don't leach. That we're not pouring footings. It's a driven pile. With regards to the slab that the inverters go on, it's a prefab concrete slab. So the landowners are happy to, we're happy to work with them in terms of soil quality monitoring, baseline at the front end through the life, and then on the back end. All of that stuff can be addressed in the lease agreement. And further, we commit to decommissioning the project via a bonded decommissioning plan at the end of the life. And that, so too, is something that feeds into the power siting board process.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Sure. Any other landowner related questions? So for the benefit of the students on the line, that sort of just showcased some of the questions that would come up. So Mike, what you put there looks interesting. We're getting long in the tooth. You know, my son has moved to Columbus. He's an attorney. He doesn't want to farm the land. I want to keep the farm in the family, but I don't have anybody to run it. But I've got all these concerns. I'm a man or a woman of the land. I've been working the land for, you know, since I was this high, and I really care about being a steward of the land. None of this happens if the investigation from the landowners concludes that we're not going to be stewards of the land. And we formally commit in all of our contracts to being stewards and doing things right and all of this. So too, and I've got to give big time props to the state of Ohio. The Ohio Power Siting Board process is filled with Power Siting Board staff members that are technical experts in investigating every single attribute of a project under the statutory review of whether a project fits within the interest of the public. So a Power Siting Board application is a very large undertaking for the applicant and for the Power Siting Board to review. This process flow chart shown on the side, the key point is that Ohio citizens are fortunate that there are very smart people that are technical experts that investigate every single element of a project. And it's all done in a fully transparent process via a docket process. It is formal, but by being formal, it does not limit participation. For local community members, participation comes in working with the developer before the application. A lot of times there are tweaks made to the application based upon community feedback. There is the formal opportunity to provide public comment on the docket. There's the formal opportunity to become an intervener in the project. All of these things from a process perspective are set up to have, I think, an equal part of technical expertise from the siting board staff and the siting board, and an opportunity for local engagement. I know Gilbert has sort of been involved in these proceedings or monitored them, and I know others on the line likely have. I don't know if folks want to comment about this, but there's a slew of activity at the siting board right now, and I've got to give props to siting board members and staff for how sincere they are in their efforts to review these projects, and just how thorough it is from the technical investigation and also the opportunity for community engagement.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. This is Gilbert, just real quick. I have attended a lot of these local hearings. They're really interesting. I'd really encourage folks to use that as a venue to get involved in this process. I have a pretty nice notebook full of notes and pros and cons and questions that are being asked, much like yours, Stephanie and Jen and others. you maybe don't get the same feel as sitting in a local high school, basketball gym or something. But one of the positive developments, perhaps, of COVID and remote work is that a lot of, or all of, to my knowledge, these power siting board meetings and hearings are actually going on virtually right now. Mike, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but that's been an interesting thing, because now we can, oh, there's a meeting tonight at 6 p.m. We can tune in regardless of your geography and wherever you are, and hear these same types of discussions and speak your mind yourself if you'd like to make a formal comment. So that's been really interesting. I'd encourage folks to jump into some of those calls as time permits.
Yeah, and further than that, don't be afraid about the formal nature. There's a lot of attorneys involved in it, but the whole process is there to support a constructive siting regime, which means that whatever the interests of the community are, that they're addressed in it. The end outcome, provided that the project has cleared the technical considerations and that there's due consideration given to the community's interest, is that the parties in the process, which generally are folks like the applicant, Ohio Farm Bureau, staff, and others, will agree on a set of conditions, 30 or so long, 35 long, that says, in order for the project to get built, the project shall have a bonded decommissioning plan. The project shall have a road use and maintenance agreement plan. The project shall maintain in good working order the underground drain tile to minimize stormwater runoff. The project shall create a vegetative screening plan to address the aesthetics of solar projects. All of these things are prerequisites for construction start. And if a power siting board certificate or a permit is issued, it's issued under the legal framework that in order to be able to go to construction and maintain construction practices and then go to operations, you have to comply with this. It's legally binding. So it's a big deal. It's formal, but by it being formal, it doesn't mean there isn't an opportunity to get engaged. The reason that I'm spending so much time on this is that the best opportunity, I think, for OU students to get engaged is learning about the reality that this industry requires multidisciplinary skills, from biologists to attorneys to economists to engineers to electricians. There's really room for everybody, and prior to construction start, it all sort of culminates at the power siting board with the application. A lot of work goes into preparing these applications. And if you're saying, well, I've got an interest in really looking at native species in terms of turf grass, and I want to make sure that as solar projects continue to proliferate, that we're looking at the right seed mix underneath the panels, that opportunity is there. and further, the development community would have an interest in engaging with you, so that when we make an application and we go to the siting board, that subject matter expertise, that's sort of technical in nature, is leaned on from a subject matter expert. Any questions on this before we talk about sort of the next phase of the process? Cool. And to Gilbert's point, we're very fortunate that the siting board website and the active cases, once you become proficient in it, pretty easy to search. You can find notices of when there will be the next public hearing. You can tune in, and if you're looking at how do I get to the next step of preparing myself for this industry, that's a great venue to tune into, to familiarize yourself with some of the vernacular. All of the application material is publicly available, and that will be a good step to go take a look at these projects that are submitting applications. Read the application. It's like a 150-page document, and understand some of the considerations. Okay, so you work for 4 years, you build trust with landowners, you build trust with local community, you go through the interconnection process, you do all the technical investigation, you submit an application to the siting board. 9 months later, a certificate is issued. Says in order to build it, you've got to comply with this list of 30 or so conditions. What's next? Once you're at that place, you're then looking to a Fortune 500 or another entity that's going to commit to buy the output via what's called a power purchase agreement. That's a binding commitment from them that for 15 or 20 years, they're going to buy the energy from the solar facility at a fixed rate. And once you have that, you are then looking towards construction start. In the set of conditions, there is a laundry list of things that you've got to do as a compliance obligation prior to construction start. That's a good thing. That's good that it's crystal clear for the developer in terms of what you got to do and for the community of how the interests are going to be protected. Once you're there, the very first thing that you will do is mobilize a civil crew, and the civil crew will be focused on driving piles and then doing the trenching for the collection lines that collect the panels. The way that these projects work is you take, call it a 10-foot long steel I-beam, galvanized steel I-beam, and you drive that pile into the soil such that the embedment depth is, call it 5 or 6 feet. And then there's a 4 or 5 foot tall driven pile standing up. The reason that we use that is a sufficient structure from a wind loading perspective to ensure the structural integrity of the system. It's a least cost way to do it, but so too, and this is a real important thing, at the end of the project life, we just pull those driven piles out. There's no concrete footer. So the soil over the life is actually rejuvenated because we're not taking out the nutrient loading. We're not continuing to till it. We enable the soil over the life of a project to sit there with turf grass on top of it, panels on top of it. So what you see here is a picture of driven piles, and then on top of that racking, where there's an installer in the bottom right, putting the panels on the driven piles on the rack. Any questions about this early stage? And we're going to keep talking about the construction process.
Just maybe you'll bring this up, the vegetation. What do you plant there, and how is that maintained, cut?
Yeah, I have a slide on that. Okay. So in what you're seeing here, you can see the seed and straw down underneath. This land is being temporarily stabilized from an erosion and sediment control perspective during construction. The project will then have permanent turf graft installed for permanent stabilization of the soil within the fence line. Outside of the fence line, there's also a vegetative screening plan to mitigate the view shed of a metal fence and the panels. The slide that I have is focused on the species generally that are used around the perimeter for vegetative screening. Was your question on the turf grass within the array, or is it on the perimeter screening?
Within the array.
Yeah, okay. So within the array, there is civil disturbance for making sure that the soil is perfectly flat. And then when you're actually driving piles, you're disturbing the land. As you can see here, in the midst of the civil disturbance process, there is seed and straw that has gone down. That's in compliance with erosion sediment control regulations. I don't know where this picture was taken. It looks like it's out west somewhere. Each different locality or state has different erosion sediment control provisions such that you don't have a stormwater runoff event. There's also perimeter control measures that will be done around the boundary of the project. But effectively, in the midst of the construction activities, you temporarily stabilize the soil via seed and straw, along with the boundary or perimeter control measures. And then once the panels are installed, you come back and likely hydroseed or drill seed the full turf underneath the panels. The way that'll be maintained is with a mower, and there's a mowing crew that'll come out and use a bush hog, and then around the post they'll use a weed trimmer, and it's all done mechanically. Don't know if that answers your question.
Yes, thanks.
Sure.
Hey, Mike, we don't have a ton of time left, so I encourage you to maybe cruise through some of the slides a little bit. But on that note, sort of counterintuitively, I wanted to ask real quick on this point about this agrivoltaics kind of concept. I don't know if you want to chat about that real quick. To my knowledge, none of the projects we're seeing in Ohio are employing this, but I didn't know if there were prospects for that, or if developers are starting to think through that process and what this sort of dual land use scenario might look like. I'm not really sure.
Yeah, it's a great question. our North Star in terms of what we're focused on is positive economic impact locally and least cost solar. So if adding goats, let's say, within the array enables one of those two goals, then it's something worth investigating. In terms of the land use, we have 10 million acres of tillable land in Ohio. And you know, if we built out every single project in the queue, which would be 15 gigawatts, I think it would sit on roughly 1% of all the tillable acreage in Ohio. So in other areas, maybe in Europe and other regions, you're seeing a little bit more of the complementary nature. That could certainly be something to investigate in the future, but we're really focused on delivering least cost power so that there's as much market adoption. If you think about, you know, the demand curve down and to the right, as price goes down, quantity goes up, and that's been the goal, but certainly something to continue discussing. Here's a picture of some trenching going on land that's more permanently stabilized within the array. You see the trenching for the runs. All of the projects have to connect to the overhead bulk transmission system, either via an existing substation or a new substation that'll be built. What you have down here in the bottom picture is a new switch yard to connect the project to the overhead transmission system. That's an area, if anybody has like a engineering background that you want to nerd out about on how all that comes together, happy to spend time, but not for today. Here is a little bit of information about project landscaping. This is around the perimeter, and the goal is to use native species and site-appropriate species. And this is actually an area that there's a lot of expertise being developed in real time in Ohio to look at this particular array, given the local community and neighbors over here and over here and over here, what is the appropriate landscaping plan along the perimeter? So when we say landscaping, there's really the perimeter for view shed aesthetics, and then within the array for permanent stabilization of the turf grass. Any questions about this? I mean, I guess another point going back to the siting board process, if you look at the siting board process, all of the permits that have been granted for the projects have said prior to construction start, you have to submit a vegetative screening or a landscaping plan that will be reviewed by staff and blessed. So the projects that are under construction, you can look at that. And I know that the development community is really focused on trying to work in consultation with the local experts, with the local nurseries and the local community to make sure that the landscaping plans for each of the project is compatible with the local community's interest and also the resources in terms of the native species. This is a pretty cool slide.
Mike, do you have to address also a habitat? Yeah, I was going to ask, do you have to address like a habitat impact mitigation plan? So like if you're disrupting certain habitats, whether they're RTs or not, rare, threatened, and endangered, but just in general, whether it's white-tailed deer or, you know, a bat or, you know, this, that, or the other, is that part of the regulation?
Yeah, it's a great question. Almost all of the land that we're going to be building on is previously disturbed. It's tillable ag land. So every 6 months it's disturbed, which makes it generally not a candidate for a habitat. That being said, there are extensive species studies that are done as part of the process. And if it's concluded that the project footprint is going to encroach on a threatened or endangered species or critical habitat, the project will be set back from that. That is a part of the process that is certainly reviewed extensively as part of the study process. And, I don't have any studies in front of me right now, but there's certainly a lot of information on the docket on the active projects to take a look at that.
Thank you.
Sure, great question. You get into renewable energy because you want to be a part of technology change and with probably a bent towards environmental stewardship. So most of the practitioners in the industry care a lot about doing things right from a habitat, species, ecological perspective, and it shows up in our work. Gilbert, why don't you very briefly touch on what these two images show and what the source of this is?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Back earlier this spring, we were approached by USEC, which is a industry coalition that Mike has been a key part of developers for solar in the Toledo area as a manufacturer. Wanted to try to better understand what the workforce, tax related and sort of broader scale economic impacts are of utility scale solar development across the state. And so we said, okay, here's what we're seeing in the power siting board queue right now. Let's project out some other scenarios of potential deployment across the state, right? 5 gigawatts, 7.5 gigawatts. And as part of that process, let's try to understand in both the one-time, construction phase to build out an array, 12, 16 months or whatever. And then in our annual operations and maintenance phase, which is impacts that we feel every year during the life of the system. We're assuming typically about 40 years for that. Let's try to understand what we're supporting in terms of jobs, right? And so we can really break this down. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but into 3 main categories. Sort of our direct impacts are felt directly from a developer or folks that are on site building out the array, for instance. Then we sort of have our indirect effects being supply chain vendors, strategic partners. This might be panel manufacturers, wiring, racking systems, legal, accountants, a variety of different folks. And then furthest to the right, which is the lightest shaded green here, you can see our sort of induced effects. That's saying, hey, we're supporting all these jobs directly and indirectly through the supply chain. And all of those folks are gaining incomes and using their disposable incomes to spend money at Kroger and go out to eat and do normal economic activity in their communities. And that's also supporting jobs in that most sort of ancillary, but really important way. So basically what we're seeing here is a bar chart that shows that breakdown of, hey, we're supporting all these jobs directly, both in the construction and O&M phases, but look at all these sort of multiplier effects that we're also bringing to the community. So that's sort of what we're looking at here, Mike, if that's helpful.
Yeah, and I guess the punchline in this is thanks to everybody for tuning in today, because there's a really neat opportunity to get involved really at the cusp of an industry that's showing a lot of potential. Ohio is really uniquely blessed in terms of the resources that it has. Believe it or not, it is like the Arizona of the PJM region. It really is. And I don't think the masses recognize sort of what the potential is in the state for solar additions. We're really focused on working through the growing pains. We know that as a young industry, not everything's going to be perfect the first time, but it's that sort of continued focus on creative problem solving and getting better and working well with communities and the siting board that we're super focused on. This talks a little bit about what happens after the project comes online. Not going to walk through that in detail. Happy to answer any questions. How can OU students get involved? This shows the 20 or so projects that are active at the siting board. Candidly, there's probably another 20, 30, 40 projects behind them. And the majority of the projects are being developed by 18 or so companies. I think they're all showcased as members of the Utility Scale Solar Energy Coalition. This is a trade association that was formed to try and continue working through the growing pains of a young industry, trying to establish best practice, saying, we want to do things right. We know that we're young. We know that we're going to make mistakes. So how do we make sure that as a cohesive industry, we actually band together and do things right? We're very fortunate to have Jason Rayfeld as the executive director. He was formerly with the Public Utility Commission. He knows sort of the process very well. And he was, we were fortunate enough that he said, that sounds interesting. I'll give it a go. So I think that The opportunity is to email Jason at director@Ohio Solar Coalition, or you can email me directly at Mike at Open Road Renewables. And now maybe we go to the more formal Q&A part of the process. And I can go past one if people want to stick around.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Yeah, we got a couple minutes here. We can stick on the line for folks who might want to. I do want to be mindful of folks' time and schedules. If they have to run, feel free. Looks like we got a couple questions in the chat, which I can read, Mike, and then you can answer them, I guess. You got it? Okay, go ahead then, yeah.
I'll start from the bottom. No,
Yeah.
projects are not in floodplains. The reason is you can't insure it, in addition to the environmental piece of it. I mean, technically you could have higher racks and have everything up on stilts, but that's incompatible with least cost. What's the projected impact to agricultural food production for animals and humans with the conversion of the farmland to solar farms? It's a great question. When you look at land use conversion, there are many, many, many multiples of land use conversion to other types of development. Solar is a temporary impact on ag land. For a 35 or 40-year period, it temporarily takes the land out of ag production. In order to answer that question sort of thoroughly and conclusively, you would have to take a look at the volume of ag acreage on a percentage basis, and then the impact of converting farmland to solar farms. What we know now is that solar farming community and the Ohio Farm Bureau has established that on-site energy production is an agricultural product. So I'm not going to say carte blanche, the Farm Bureau loves solar, but they certainly recognize that it plays a role and is compatible with the ag resource that we have. You know, that's probably a conversation for the likes of Dale Arnold and maybe we could set up a follow-up conversation on that. And that may be, you know, a study area for the Weinrich School to take a look at. I think that's a really interesting question. Let's see, any other questions?
Sorry.
Go ahead, Abe. Yeah, nice to see you. Go ahead.
I just had a quick question. You said that sometimes it can take a few years when you're like working with someone from sending the letter and talking to them on their porch. How does that work with like quoting them on sales numbers, considering like innovations are changing the price of solar like every year?
Yeah, that's a great question. We offer the landowner the same amount. What ends up happening is if solar cost continues to come down and the levelized cost continues to come down, then we will turn around and share that savings with the off-taker. Like the Amazon of the world will buy the energy at a cheaper rate, but the landowner will get the same offer from the very beginning. And we give the same offer to everybody in the community. So hopefully that makes sense, that the declining cost of solar is actually going to be passed on to the consumers, almost sort of like in any economic consequence, it always goes to the burden or the benefit goes to the consumer. That so too is happening here, where the consumer is actually the power purchaser of the output of the solar array.
Awesome, thank you.
Good question. Others?
Other questions for Mike or thoughts? I know it's one, so if folks have to hop off, no worries. We could stay on for another minute or two. Go ahead, Stephanie. Yeah.
Yeah, Mike, I might reach out later. I direct a large program with the U.S. Department of Energy, and we are repurposing a DOE facility in Southern Ohio, moving towards an integrated energy system complex. We've had some discussions with other solar providers. We have an EHV that runs through the site. It's 765 kV, and it's at the interconnection of PGM and MISO. So there's some other T&D opportunities there for renewables, because obviously you need the extra high voltage lines, you know, to transmit. So as we move forward, I'll just maybe touch base with Gilbert about reaching out to you when that might be an appropriate time, just to see if there's any interest in maybe having you as a partner, see where that might go.
Yeah, sounds really, really exciting. Going back to the unit economic concept at 765, the upgrade cost and the main power transformer are more expensive than at like 69, 115, 138, 230, 345 kV. Do you know the location if there's scale on the surrounding ag land that could accommodate the unit economics of the upgrade cost for the 765.
Yes, I think there are, because one of these solar providers that we're working with is siting facilities in Southern Ohio, some solar farms. We can kind of look at, because what we're talking about is at a larger scale. We're having some discussions with 3 national labs.
Cool.
About trying to integrate nuclear, renewables, and the Energy Technology Lab, which is kind of the applied lab for fossil energy. And we're trying to move towards a federal demonstration project where we're looking at an all of the above energy strategy, because we need some transitions, obviously, until renewables get to capacity. The other issue would be storage. And I don't know if you do anything with storage. That's something else we're looking at as well.
Yeah, would love to be a resource for you as a practitioner. We're familiar with all those technologies and happy to compare notes. My email's in the bottom here. Pretty easy. I think Jason, I don't know if he's on the line or not, but he would have interest in participating as well. And any way that we can help as you guys, go through the ideation process, would be happy to play a role in it. Sounds cool.
Okay, thanks. I have to hop off for another Zoom, but this was really fabulous. Thanks, Mike.
Oh, sure. And I think it's being recorded. People want the slides. I'm an open book. I'm here to help. As you can tell, I have a real passion for the industry. Very fortunate to be able to do things like this. Very fortunate to be able to throw on jeans and a flannel and go work with farmers. I absolutely love that part of the job. And so too, I'm fortunate that, put my head in Microsoft Excel and model some stuff out like Gilbert does all the time. I try and keep up with him. So it's been great to connect with the OU community. We are very thankful for the partnership we have with the Voinovich School and specifically the economic impact report that was done. I am hopeful that there will be more partnership opportunities in the future. And, there's been a lot of good questions that have come out today. And if you have follow-ups, let's keep working it.
Thanks, Mike. That's amazing. We appreciate the partnership as well. And this has been really fun. Sometimes I wish we had 2 hours to do these types of things. If anyone has any burning questions, feel free to unmute yourself or drop it in the chat. If not, I'd encourage folks to reach out to Jason or Mike directly or myself too, for that matter. It looks like we'll probably wrap up here. So thanks for everyone for joining. I have one quick note that our next Lunch and Learn is on November 13th. So tune in for that. And the topic for that Lunch and Learn is MPA student internships, if I'm not mistaken. So with that, I'm gonna end the session here. Thanks again so much, Mike. We look forward to working together in the future. Appreciate you coming to talk to the school.
Happy Halloween, folks. Be safe this weekend. See y'all.
Absolutely. All right, take care.
Bye.